Okay, Adam, Tar Heels, Campbell, first meeting between the Heels and the Camels. Campbell just in its 15th year ever of existence in football. Started their program back in 2008. Mike Minter is the head coach. Really good player in his day. He was a two-time national champion at Nebraska. Played for around a decade in the NFL with the Panthers. He was on that, I think it was Super Bowl 38 that the Panthers lost on an Adam Vinatieri field goal at the horn against the Patriots. But Minter was a part of that Panthers team, so some really a good player on good teams, a dude who knows football. They come in 4-4 overall, 3-3 in the CAA. Yeah, Adam, I think they're not the top of the heap in the FCS, but they're also not a bad FCS team. I think they're a very solid FCS team. Some of their losses have been to the better teams in the FCS. They lost to William & Mary. They lost an overtime game to Central, who won the HBCU national title a year ago. And that was a game they lost a big lead, lost in overtime, had their extra point blocked in overtime to lose by 1. Lost last week to Richmond. That's really one of the few games that got away from them. Like they lost 44-13. But every other game, maybe William & Mary a little bit, but every other game's been either a blowout win for them or a competitive game. Their strength, hands down, is on the offensive side. Their quarterback is good. Hajj Malik Williams, fifth-year player, and he can run. He's very accurate. He's completing almost 3/4 of his passes, and I think it is because, one, they protect him well. 2, he rarely throws under duress because if he isn't protected, he's good enough to run. And 3, they've just got a good offensive scheme. Guys are open a lot of times when he's throwing to them. They do a nice job stretching the field. I think it's Jason Kelsey. Jalen Kelsey. Good deep threat in the pass game. He's caught a bunch of balls over the top that for some explosive plays. They play with tempo offensively, which has given Carolina trouble here over the last couple of weeks. And they can run the football okay. They're better passing it, but they are a decent running team. So all of that is to say, I think their numbers, again, at the FCS level, are comparable to Carolina's numbers offensively at the FBS level. So I'm not saying that they're as good as Carolina offensively, but against their level of competition, it is comparable to what Carolina does offensively, statistically. Defensively, it's been a bigger challenge for them. They have not been as good on that side of the ball, which leads me to believe Carolina has an opportunity to have a big day on offense. Adam, having said all of that, Carolina is heavily favored. The Tar Heels should be heavily favored. And that's nothing negative about Campbell. This is FBS versus FCS. Carolina has more scholarships. Carolina has more money. Carolina recruits different athletes. Carolina has better facilities. And that's just a fact of FBS versus FCS. Having said that, every year you see FCS teams win these games every now and then. But Adam, Carolina is the better football team, as it should be. If the Tar Heels go out and play, they should win this game. Now, they've got to go play. And I do think that you don't want this to be 35-27 or something in the third quarter. Carolina needs to go out there and take care of business because it has a really, I think, season-defining stretch coming up with Duke, Clemson, and NC State to follow. But first things first, and that's Carolina hosting Campbell.
Two teams that have probably heard similar messages from their head coach this week because their last game got away from them in the fourth quarter. You know about Carolina's, and Jones mentioned that Richmond game. The final score didn't end up being close, but it was close going into the fourth quarter. And then Campbell just kind of fell apart, which the Tar Heels can relate to. I was a little surprised that Mac Brown said this week that he didn't feel like this Campbell game was positioned well, because I thought to myself, well, this is probably a good time to be playing Campbell, get back on track before this stretch. It seems like Mac Brown didn't feel that way. He still likes this type of game at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I think Carolina tried hard to get this game moved to week 0. For various reasons that didn't work. But I think the reason Carolina wanted that was twofold, in my opinion. I've not, like Mac Brown hasn't specifically told me this, but this is just kind of reading the context clues that I think is accurate. One, they wanted to have a game before South Carolina. Now, as it turned out, Tar Heels played great, won the game, so it didn't, in this regard, didn't matter. But as we've talked about before, you never play your best in the first week. I always think it's better to play somebody that you have a good chance to beat in that first week. And then, Adam, what I do think is more relevant is I think the Tar Heels enjoyed having 2 bye weeks. And that's the one that's more, like, I feel pretty confident about the first part. This is more my opinion. I think they enjoyed having the 2 bye weeks that come with the week 0 game because it's a long, college football's long, man. And it's just getting longer with the playoff expanding and everything that's happening. If you have a good year, it is a grind, and it's getting closer and closer to an NFL-length season. So, I mean, remember, Carolina's bye week was early this year. It was after the Pitt game, so after the 4th game of the year. And now the Tar Heels have played 4 games since then, and they still have 4 games to go with no break. And I think that is a daunting task. Now, is Carolina the only team dealing with things like that? Absolutely not. Are they the only team that's sore and beat up and tired? Of course not. Everybody is this time of year. But I think if you can manage that to better give you an opportunity to get a breather, that's good. Now, ideally, midway through the third quarter, Connor Harrell's out there and you got some freshmen getting some snaps and you've rotated in some young players on the offensive and defensive line because you're up by multiple scores. That's ideally, but that's not guaranteed. You still got to go do it. Carolina still got to go play. Carolina can't kick this ball off and dipsy-do like we talked about the Virginia game. And Carolina didn't come close to playing to the standard that it wanted to in that game. So that's what you're playing against if you're Carolina, because if you don't, then all of a sudden you got Campbell, who's never been in Kenan Stadium before, who obviously is going to want to knock off the Tar Heels, and you got them with a 5th-year quarterback believing that they can do something. You don't want to be in that situation in this game.
Well, it's not like you're playing a bunch of fellows from Bowie's Creek. Mike Minter's been active in the transfer portal. He's got players who have played for Florida State, for example.
Their roster is interesting to me. I kind of assumed before I got started, there's going to be a bunch of North Carolina kids, and they have several North Carolina players, as you would expect. But then, Adam, you start seeing, there are several guys from California on this team. You mentioned transfer Florida State. There's an LSU transfer. There's several, 2 or 3 NC State transfers, a Wake Forest transfer, a UCLA transfer. So some guys that have, for whatever reason, were good enough to be recruited to the FBS Power 5 level, but for whatever reason it didn't work, and there's always different reasons why that would happen, and have found a different place in which they can be successful. So the transfer portal works for all in different ways. So I do think that a team like Campbell can upgrade its talent pretty quickly. And this, Carolina played Wofford a couple years ago, and Wofford was not good. They were a bad FCS team. This is not a bad FCS team. This is a team that has some pieces that can compete. Again, I'm saying all this fully understanding the Tar Heels should win this game. But don't expect Campbell to show up and, the Benny Hill music to start playing and they're fumbling themselves all over the field. This is a competent team that has some pieces.
And there's no better way to make yourself appealing in the transfer portal than to put up solid numbers against a Power 5 opponent, because that is something people look at. How did you perform? And so Campbell's players are aware of that. This is important for their resume.
And, Adam, I think it's going to be hard to draw any conclusions on Carolina coming out of this game, unless it's bad. Any good conclusions, there's going to be the qualifier of, well, it was Campbell. And that is, I don't say that to say something mean about the Camels. That is go. Carolina could put up 100 points and 1,500 yards, and people are going to say, "Well, yeah, you did. How come you didn't do that against Virginia?" So nothing Carolina does from the outside is going to qualify unless it's bad. But I do think this is important for Carolina to show some things like Hubert Davis talked about. Obviously that's basketball, but what he talked about after that exhibition game. Show some things that can travel. Show some things that can be consistent regardless of opponent. Get lined up right if Campbell goes tempo. Fit the run gaps better. Get into the backfield some. Now, again, you're not playing as good an offensive line this week as you're going to against Duke, Clemson, or NC State. But be disruptive and force some turnovers. I mean, Campbell's blocked 2 punts this year. Don't get a punt blocked. So, I mean, there's some things that I think can travel regardless of opponent. And again, this is my opinion. I haven't heard the coaches say this necessarily, but I would assume that is one of your goals this week. Do things that give you a chance to win if you're playing Campbell or if you're playing the San Francisco 49ers. And I think that should be a goal this week for Carolina.
Well, you talked about playing to the standard, and Mac Brown's talked about that over and over. Carolina doesn't feel like it did that the last 2 weeks. So no matter who the opponent is this week, it's a chance to do that.
Adam, anything? Military Appreciation Day, you wrote a great story about Matt Merletti, a former pod guest, of course, a potty winner, a family that is ripe with potties.
All kinds of pod connections on Saturday. If you're in Kenan Stadium, get ready to nudge whoever's next. You go, I heard about this on the pod several times. The Merletti family will be there. Matt and his brother Mike and their dad Lou. They'll all be there. It's the 15th anniversary.
I got a question, Adam.
Okay.
Whenever we're finished with the pod, never. If you, like, Lou Merletti, maybe a top 5 interview, top 10? I mean, he's got to be in that conversation, right?
Oh, yeah. In terms of the things that he's been part of that we got to hear about?
Oh, I mean, he
yes.
might be number 1.
Yeah.
But, I mean, just the interview. I mean, that was an all-timer. Christmas Spectacular last year. I mean, come on. Lou Merletti and 3 wise men and a baby. It was an all-time pod.
Well, and don't.
I mean, Biltmore Christmas or whatever it is this year's got a high standard.
The bar's high. And don't forget that Matt Merletti, also a potty winner. His episode was October 4th of 2019. If you missed that, I feel like you need to listen to him first. He's like the prequel.
Yeah.
Because he's going to introduce you to some of the things that Lou Merletti talks about.
Yeah, he's like the Phantom Menace.
Way better than the Phantom Menace. But you'll kind of hear about it from Matt's perspective growing up as a kid, some of the things his dad was going through that you'll later hear about from his dad. And then, of course, also great Tar Heel, played in the NFL, etc. But Saturday, they're celebrating the 15th anniversary of Matt sort of orchestrating the American flag that Carolina runs out of the tunnel with. There's the story Jones mentioned on Go Heels that has all the details about that. So he'll be honored on the field. Also honored on the field, Tim Quinn.
Really? TQ in the house.
August 18th, 2023. He was on the pod, and I think he's going to be a part of those Military Appreciation Day festivities. TQ and the whole TQ fam will be in Kenan Stadium. I think DJ Jones is going to be carrying the flag out. Both his parents are veterans.
That's cool.
So a lot of cool things associated with this on Saturday.
Well, in all reality, like the military, I mean, we all understand the importance of the military, but it's important in this state. I mean, North Carolina, there are a lot of families that are impacted by military service. And so, especially in eastern North Carolina, I mean, in Goldsboro and Jacksonville and Fayetteville. And I mean, there's some huge military influences in this state. And so even something as small as a football game gives us the opportunity to say thank you to them. So I do think, again, a small gesture, and it's a football game, but I do think it is something that is nice to do and important to do, particularly in our area of the country.
There's some people very close to the hearts of the pod who are impacted
absolutely
every day, including right now, who we're thinking about. Even at times when perhaps the military is not on the forefront of what everyone in the country is talking about, It's their daily life.
Yeah.